And before I bring him out, I just want to kind of weave together a little bit of a verbal tapestry before he comes out. We all had responses to COVID when it began. And as a radio guy, my response was to reach out more than ever and do interviews with these musicians. A lot of these musicians were in places like New York where they were stacked up like tin cans, and there was just not a lot of outlets after the neighbors heard the horn for long enough. So it was really good to be able to talk to them. Benny was one of those that I talked to in about July of 2020 when things got really weird. Lots of layers, gasoline was thrown into the fire, there was a lot going on. But we had a really engaging conversation about his career. He just released an album. It was a weird time for musicians that were releasing albums at the time. Promotion, everything was different, shows melted away. But I remember the very last thing that he said to me in that interview, which he just kind of added it as an addendum. He was like, I haven't been to Kansas City. I can't wait to be there. Oh. And he knew Adam Larson. He heard great things about it. As far as I'm concerned, this is almost kind of like a hidden gem. Kansas City is a wondrous town full of arts and culture. Mm-hmm. It's almost like we're holding on to a secret. Mm-hmm. So without any further ado, I want to welcome the wonderful, talented, rising artist, someone who's an old soul, Mr. Benny Benack III.
Yeah, exactly. In Pittsburgh, locally, the name Benny Benack, actually part of the reason why I bother to indicate that I'm Benny Benack III is because my father, Benny Benack Jr., plays the saxophone, and my grandfather, aforementioned Benny Benack Sr., was really a quite prominent trumpeter, mostly in Pittsburgh in his day, but really an outstanding jazz trumpeter. So growing up, if there was a listing in the newspaper and it just said Benny Benack at the Rhythm House on Friday night, people wouldn't know whether it was my dad's band or if it was my band. And still to this day, because my dad is active in Pittsburgh, my dad will call me like once a month and say, somebody came up to me at my gig tonight and asked me why I wasn't singing, and I had to tell them it was my son that sings. And people will come up to me after concerts and say, your father played my high school graduation in 1974, and I was like, that was probably my grandfather, you know. But actually, I was on the road in Cincinnati, playing at a club called Cafe Vivace, great club there in Cincinnati, last month, and a woman came up to me and had these photographs, and she was like, your grandfather and your father together played my wedding in the Carnegie Club in 1980, whatever, and she had these pictures. And those pictures were actually from like months before my grandfather passed away, because he had lung cancer from many years and smoking and playing in smoky jazz rooms every night. So he actually passed away before I was born. But it was amazing to see these photos of him, you know, before he was even diagnosed, you know, 6 months before he passed, but just looking so vibrant and on a gig with my dad, who was about my age at the time. So there's a lot of jazz history there. And yeah, my grandfather would always play a tailgate in the parking lot for all the Pirates and Steelers games. And of course, for this show, my mother, Claudia Benack, is a vocal professor in the drama department at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. So all of her students from CMU moved to New York and star on Broadway. So really, I'm so at home on this show because I'm like literally the child of Broadway and jazz married together. So this show it couldn't be any more near and dear to my heart. You know, Kansas City has been a hub for this music for a long time, all the way back to Charlie Parker. And Pittsburghers can get very prideful. I've gotten in some long late-night bar fights with folks from Detroit arguing about who had more notable jazz musicians. But I think Kansas City is one of those kind of hubs for jazz that everybody around the country knows. You know, obviously New York is New York. In the Midwest, also Chicago kind of has its own scene. But after New York and Chicago, I think probably the highest concentration of great musicians and clubs to play has to be Kansas City. And Adam Larson, we mentioned, he was a classmate of mine at the Manhattan School of Music and lived in New York for many years. And he could have moved anywhere with his family to get a college teaching job. And he was like, I want to come to Kansas City. And you look at his calendar and he has a gig, 30 gigs in a month. So this is a really active scene. And we were saying backstage, we have some friends from the scene here, really outstanding musicians that are coming to the show that inexplicably don't have a gig themselves tonight, I guess. So you definitely feel it when we're in a city like this. You know, you're in a place where there's a lot of jazz history. You know, being around an artists, I should say, like our other stars of the show, Jabu, Gray Deal on Tap, and Stella Cole, who are both, you know, just a couple years younger than me. It makes me feel like more of an old soul, but really, everyone in this band really are beyond their years in road experience. For example, Jabu, the tap dancer, we met in 2018 on a European tour with a group called Postmodern Jukebox, which, if you haven't heard of them, their shtick is basically taking modern pop and rock music and putting it into kind of 1920s Great Gatsby jazz arrangements, and just gangbusters. Millions of views on YouTube. Every tour in Europe, you're playing arenas for 16,000 people, and it's all jazz music.
The time machine's out behind the theater, and you can go anywhere in the annals of Kansas City history and see one show. Where are you going?
I mean, there's no other answer other than Charlie Parker, I guess, right? I mean, so many great musicians are here, but even though I'm a trumpeter by trade, I remember one of the first lessons I took when I moved to New York City as 18-year-old. I went to study with Marcus Printup, who's a trumpeter in the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra with Wynton Marsalis, and I went down to Lincoln Center, and I got this lesson with him, and the whole lesson was the Charlie Parker Omnibook, which is just a book of every transcription of every solo that Charlie Bird Parker ever played. And he just kind of threw that down on the music stand, and he just kind of opened up to a random page, and he said, this is all the language you ever need to know about playing jazz music, so we're going to play through these. And that was the whole lesson. We just played Charlie Parker solos. And looking back now, 15 years later, he was exactly right. That's pretty much all you need is Charlie Parker, so I'd give anything to hear him live. And maybe if Dizzy Gillespie was in the band too, or a young Miles Davis, I wouldn't complain if they were in the trumpet chair.
You can have a trio, that's fine.
Yeah.
And at one point you were talking about Sonny Rollins, about you're trying to figure your horn out, you're trying to figure it out. Who are you today? And you made it very clear at that point, it changes. But who are you right at this moment?
Yeah, I mean, that is, especially for an artist's journey, that's a question that is never, you know, it's not static, it's not stagnant, it can change. But I find myself more in spaces like this, where we're coming up, not only performing these shows, but also crafting a theme like this. This whole idea of jazz and Broadway was something that I was sort of mulling over in my head, and I'm already working on another show with this same company next year that's called The Magic of Manhattan, and it's just kind of all songs about New York. It's sort of my love letter to Bobby Short, Blossom Dearie, and sort of the theme of New York. And putting on a sort of different hat, more of like a producer hat, and kind of, you know, being the ringleader, so to speak, is very different than just kind of thinking, you know, like I'm Miles Davis playing